Welcome to the Peak Provider NDIS podcast. My name is Chris Hall, your host, and today I've got Emma Bennison, who's the Chief Innovation Officer from Life Without Barriers. Emma is an advocate, mentor, innovator, visionary leader who is passionate about creating organizational culture that attracts great people, achieves outstanding results, and nurtures future leaders. So, Emma, it's a pleasure to have you on today. You're a mover and a shaker in the industry. So I'm really interested to talk about some of the initiatives that you're doing at Life Without Barriers, plus some of the other organizations that you're involved with. So welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Chris. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So look, I mean, Emma, in terms of Life Without Barriers, can you tell us a little bit about, your background and your journey in terms of becoming the Chief Innovation Officer at Life Without Barriers?
Well, it's been a pretty long journey in one way or another. If we wanted to sort of talk about my advocacy journey, that goes back about 30 years. I think my first real advocacy experience happened when I was about 17, and somebody said to me, I was in year 12 at school, and you know how they do those or they used to do those standardized tests.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody made the mistake of saying to me, "Oh, in the booklet that talks about the test, they say that anybody in Australia, or anybody in Queensland, in fact, it was, can do this test." And of course that got me a bit fired up, because I was like, well, hang on, I can't. They've told me I can't, because it's quite visual and whatever. And so I went home and told my dad, and he said, well, what do you want to do about it? And so we went and had a meeting, and we got them to let me do the test. And so that's where my kind of advocacy journey started. And I'm always very kind of grateful to my dad for recognizing that this was an injustice, and it was discriminatory, and we needed to do something about it. And I always kind of credit him with getting me interested in it, really. But since then I've held 3 CEO roles. The first was with Access Arts, the Queensland's arts and disability organisation. I then moved to Arts Access Australia, which is the national peak body for arts and disability. And then more recently was CEO of Blind Citizens Australia, the national representative organisation of Australians who are blind or vision impaired. And that was up until early 2022. And then I took a bit of I was going to say I took a break, but that's not really true, because I actually was doing a bit of consulting work and always advocating here and there, doing some board roles. And then joined Life Without Barriers in October last year, and it's been a really exciting experience to join such a different organisation to anywhere that I've worked before. I mean, Life Without Barriers is a massive organisation, has over 8,000 staff. It's started out as a disability organisation, but it's transformed into a human services organisation, one of the largest in Australia. And so that's been both really exciting, but also quite daunting, because it's a very, very significant gear change for me in some ways. But innovation has always been at the core of everything I've ever done. I'm not the kind of person who just sort of sits back and waits for things to happen. And so this feels like the perfect role for me to actually create change and to challenge compassionately, but challenge very clearly some of the areas where change is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to dive into that absolutely through this conversation. I find it inspirational to listen to your journey there, going all the way back to 17. I remember my son is an NDIS participant, and he's 7 years old. And I remember when we were applying for funding for the first time, a dear friend of mine, her son is also, has a plan, and she said to me, she says, "Look, you are the only person that, and you must, as a father and a mother, you and your wife, you must fiercely advocate for your child and what their needs are, what their supports are, etc. And because no one else will do it, as well as you." So I think that that really speaks to my heart in terms of the parental journey, and you referenced your father there.
Yep.
It also kind of connects with what advocacy really is, right? So I suppose advocacy is a combination of standing up for what is right, to solve injustice. And I want to ask you this: would you also agree it's an educational piece?
Oh, absolutely. It's all about education, I think. I mean, it certainly is about standing up for what is right. But if you do that, and sometimes it's hard not to do that with a sense of kind of righteous indignation that, why on earth why are we still having conversations about people not being able to get onto airplanes in 2023, for example?
Yes.
Why are we still having conversations about people being discriminated against in employment in 2023? But we are, and that's where we are. But the the best approach I have always found to advocacy is taking, that really kind of curious approach, and coming in and asking people for their perspective. So rather than me just coming in and saying, look, this is a problem and we need to fix it, I'm always interested in, well, why did you do it that way in the first place? What was your rationale for only letting I think it's three wheelchair users onto a flight at any one time? Why would you do that? And then trying to solve the problem together. So, rather than coming at it as you've done the wrong thing, you need to be punished. You need to feel ashamed. You need to be, afraid. All of those things. I try to come at it somewhat differently and say, how can we collaborate to solve this problem?
Exactly, and that's interesting because I think of two words come to mind. You've got ignorance and you've got nescience. Now, nescience is not a commonly understood word. Nescience is the lack of knowledge, right? So we literally don't have the knowledge about whatever the subject matter is. The way I think about ignorance is literally, the ignoring of the facts or the knowledge. You're ignoring the knowledge that you have. So I think that there's a lot of nescience when it comes to people just literally don't have the information, and that can be, in your inquisitive exploration of why. That's fantastic to uncover where there's nescience, i.e., the lack of knowledge. When there's ignorance, gosh, I mean, that
Yes.
can, perhaps be
It's a
a
different
stickier
story.
subject. That can be
It's
a
a different
stickier
story.
subject, can't it? Because it can be
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
gosh, you actually knew that was wrong, but you did it.
But you did it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. But sometimes just again, I love the philosophy of not coming across as, and for want of a better word, high and mighty about it. It's more like, hey, why did you do that? And even if the person did it out of ignorance when they knew they should have done something differently, then perhaps even just the conversation itself will stir them and move them on, never to make that type of mistake again.
Yeah, and I think also kind of, and it takes a lot of energy to do this, and I'm not suggesting that everybody wants to be vulnerable or should have to be vulnerable in advocacy. But even if you have the energy and the headspace to be able to articulate to that person who is showing extreme ignorance, which reality is some people do, that what how it's impacted you, how their ignorance has actually impacted on you, and how it's made you feel. Sometimes that can move them into a different place. It can move them into a space of going, oh, gee, that I didn't realize it would have that effect on you. And then you're having a whole different conversation, because you're having a conversation about humanity rather than a conversation just about, this is wrong and this is right, and we're all polarized and we're all, adversaries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also the, do you know, also come to my mind the generational differences. So, like, I recently
Yeah.
turned 40, right? So I'm a 1980s kid,
Mm-hmm.
and my son's autistic, right? So when it comes to
Yeah.
him going to primary school recently in the last 2 years, my wife and I
Mm-hmm.
were anxious about, how will he settle in? Will he be
Mm-hmm.
overwhelmed? Will he be accepted? Could he be bullied?
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think, like, let me call out, I think, an elephant in the room. I think, our older generation, but I'd include myself in that, like in this kind of middle-aged generation, I think that we grew up with, unfortunately, perhaps a less accepting environment when it comes to any form of disability, right? What I'm happy to say, in my little Central Coast New South Wales town that I love dearly, the school is so values-based and conscious, and that kind of level, like at the literally the child level of each year group, we've had no issues at all. And that's because they're
That's great to
leading,
hear.
it's so beautiful. They're leading from a place of values. And sure, some kids might go, okay, he's different or whatever, whatever is their version of reality. But there's an acceptance, and that just,
Mm,
like, honestly, it brings me to tears, like, just talking about
mm,
it. Like,
mm,
it makes me feel
mm.
very warm and fuzzy. Now, I know not every educational institution, unfortunately, has that, here's the distinction, I guess, I want to get your insight on. You've got leadership of organizations, whether it be schools or corporates. Let's say we want to get Virgin or Jetstar to have a more inclusive approach. So you've got to tackle it from the leadership approach, but also at that kind of level of what is inside the ecosystem itself, whether it be customers or fellow classmates. Can you see that my point here is that you've got leadership
Yeah.
and you've got the ecosystem? So, like, what do you think about that in terms of how you influence both of those?
Oh, I think we absolutely have to influence both because, reality is, no minority group can do it all. We need the rest of the world to work with us to influence leadership and particularly corporate leadership. And the notion that we can do it on our own, I think is wrong. And I think it is really important. That's why attitudinal change and shifting people's perspectives, and as you say, getting people to think about values and so forth is so critical because if we're just influencing it from the leadership perspective, then we might have some wins, and we definitely have had some wins, um, but we're not going to make that really significant societal shift that we need to make if we want real equity and equality for people with disability and people in other minority groups as well.
Exactly. It kind of speaks to culture, right? So I think that culture
Mm,
has to be lived and breathed. And so, in the pursuit of advocacy, I suppose that is the energy that we have to input to the system of society so that we can bring gradually, even if it's slowly but surely, we can cause that shift of culture.
mm,
Let me just segue into some of your stuff that you're doing in the inclusion and employment section of,
mm,
of, of your role.
mm,
So at Life Without Barriers, I believe it's formally called the Access, Inclusion and Employment Plan.
correct.
Can you share some of the initiatives and strategies that are included as part of that?
Yeah. So we have this plan. It's a plan that runs from 2022 to 2025, and I guess the cornerstone of our plan is our aspiration or our target that 15% of our employees comfortably and openly identify as people with disability, and that those employees are across all levels of the organisation. And you know, that's a great target to have because these sorts of things. A lot of people argue about whether targets are necessary, and they say, well, maybe it's not necessary to have a target. You can just sort of have goodwill and hope that hope that it will happen. But it's that old adage of what you don't measure doesn't get done. So I'm very proud that we have a target. I think some of the other actions in the plan are about the nuts and bolts of making our organisation as accessible as it can be it physical accessibility, be it information accessibility, be it accessibility in relation to how we communicate with people and so forth. And then the other aspect of it is all about employment, and I suppose that's kind of at three levels. We're looking at our own employment, and that refers to the target that I just spoke about. But we're also and in doing that, we're looking at recruitment and retention, and all aspects of how we're doing employment for people with disability. Then we're also looking at what we offer in terms of services, employment services to particularly young people with disability. We've got some small programs for school leavers, pathway programs, but we're looking to expand those over time. And then we're also very committed to capitalizing on our scale and our ability to have impact as a large influential organisation to try to lead by example and encourage corporates and government and other organisations to also set targets around employment of people with disability, and then to also for us to also influence social policy around employment in terms of how the government actually responds to the really significant challenge that we have in the area of disability employment. It's a huge challenge, and the needle really hasn't moved in 30 years, despite all of our best efforts and many worthy programs and funding and all sorts of things. But we really haven't cracked the code yet.
It's going to look, I think innovation is the key to that in terms of the supported employment model within the NDIS. I had a wonderful conversation just last week with Myron Mann, the CEO of Bedford Group, and they were talking about their approach to supported employment and basically almost a supply chain, businesses being set up on themselves so that they're self-sustaining and attracting younger workforces through technology. And so one of the things we touched upon in that podcast was the need for different government departments to talk to one another, and also specifically for the vet sector from a vocational training perspective to be better linked. So it's really exciting and great to hear that Life Without Barriers is focusing on the school-based, the school pathway in terms of leaving school. I think that's crucial to have
absolutely.
that going on. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, but we also have to remember that many people acquire their impairment, later in life, and they also need support. And so we need a whole of life approach to employment. I think, and certainly I totally agree with you that this school leaver kind of programs are really critical, and that if we can give people opportunities to actually test and try things just like any of us will do when you leave school, especially these days. I've got a child who's a young adult who's 20, and she's still figuring out exactly what she wants to do, and it's a much more fluid kind of approach, I think, these days when you leave school, to kind of testing and trying different career pathways and everybody else has that opportunity, and people with disability, we deserve that opportunity too. So,
Yes.
yeah, I agree. It's fantastic that we are doing that work.
I like the. I'd almost use the description tasting menu, right? Because that
Yeah,
is fair and
yeah,
representative of the of, I guess, Gen Z culture. Is to
yeah,
go between jobs and companies much more
yeah,
often.
yeah,
So
yeah.
let's kind of talk about the capacity building side of things. So, like, building capacity. If people have a disability and they want to work in a leadership position, for example,
Hmm.
let's say in the corporate world or whatever, I know that that's something that you're passionate about.
Mm,
You're a great inspiration in that, in what you've achieved, and also what you're doing in the sector, right? So can you kind of speak to what that type of building of capacity looks like, and some of the success
mm,
stories that you've
mm,
managed to
mm.
effectuate?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say, because if I don't say it now, I'll forget, um, is that the capacity building has to go both ways. Um, there's a real propensity, and it's not intentional, but it concerns me increasingly that there's a propensity for people to assume that the problem is, or that the challenge that we face is building the capacity of people with disability so that they can take up leadership positions. Now, of course, that's true, but there's another piece that sort of gets left out of the conversation, which is equally important, and that is that we need to build the capacity of non-disabled leaders to accept the fact that people with disability actually have the capacity to lead, because that's actually the other half of the equation. And if we don't get that right, and we're already starting to see this, we have a huge number of very, very skilled and talented people with disability in our community who have absolute capacity to lead. But unfortunately, because many of our leaders, with all the best will in the world and the best of intentions, still ultimately see us as objects of charity or objects of pity or people that need to be helped. Um, so we have a problem, because we're ready to lead, but we can't get in the door. And that's
Mm,
before you even get to the question of accessibility and whether we can actually get in the door
that's
physically.
really interesting.
Uh,
Yeah.
however, so I think there's still a very medicalized approach. We've made some strides in terms of applying the human rights model, I think, in some other areas of disability access. But in this one, I still think the medical model holds true. I still think that there's a real fear that people with disability won't be a safe pair of hands. It's okay to have us in a job, but the thought of us actually running an organization worries people, I think, if we're honest. I don't think people are that comfortable with it. I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It's a really
and
good point,
so,
because it's the ecosystem thing again. Like we were
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about, my
yeah,
analogy of
that's
my
right.
son at school, right? If the
Yeah,
broader ecosystem has acceptance, values, knowledge, etc.,
yeah,
then yeah, that's how
yeah,
that you can create that. Gosh,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So having said that, to go back to your question, now
Mm,
that I've that I've got that out of my system, um, to go back to your question though, it's a good one. Um, you know, absolutely, there needs to be better, I think, capacity building opportunities. And so what I mean by that is, um, you know, there needs to be on the job learning opportunities. So, for instance, Life Without Barriers is in the process of bringing on what we call a CEO intern,
mm,
and we're doing that work in partnership with the Disability Leadership Institute. Um, Urala's already done this,
mhm,
and they were the first organisation to do it, and now we're following suit. And I think it's really exciting, because we're bringing someone in who already has some executive level skill,
mhm.
and we're giving them an opportunity to experience what it's actually like to be the CEO of a large organization or to be a senior leader in a large organization. And we're, giving them that opportunity to have that experience firsthand. And that's really exciting. So long as we then offer pathways, like genuine pathways for people to actually become the CEO of a large organization in the future. But so it's great. It's great that we're doing that. The other area where I think I've had some success previously is that when I was working at Arts Access Australia, I worked with the Australia Council for the Arts to introduce some disability leadership development programs that were very specifically about looking at people's personal kind of experience of disability and actually figuring out what the positives were and what the assets were that people gained from having disability, which is, not something we talk about very often, unfortunately. We should talk about it more. But, there are, people with disability have, extraordinary capacity in many cases for problem solving, extraordinary capacity for innovation, all of those things, because we've had to do it day in and day out in order to kind of get through the airport or do whatever we need to do. So all of those skills that we've developed can be applied in a leadership context. And if we start to flip it on its head and have those conversations, then it gets really exciting and people start to go, oh my goodness, I am a leader. I can be a leader. And then when I was working with Blind Citizens Australia, I implemented an executive leadership program, which also had a kind of an approach which capitalized on people's strengths, of blindness and skills of blindness to kind of see how they could bring those skills to the leadership experience. And it's been really great to see people going through that program. It's in its second year now, and it's just we've just had another group of people graduate. And so, it's really exciting to see some of those programs working. But as I said before, that is only useful if there are then opportunities for us to actually utilize those skills in a leadership role.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the next part of the challenge that we really have to grapple with. We can't just keep training people up and then not providing a pathway.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's such a rich tapestry of individuals, right? And every person has got their contributions. Sometimes people need support. Sometimes people need adjustments. I think that what I want to say now is not about any specific disability, but like just to speak candidly, I think ADHD and autism, as two quick examples, are wonderful ways to have creative thinking and innovative thinking. Again, it's not just about people with with that. I guess the point is that there can be a high level of intuition and alternative perspectives, and also kind of that kind of like a complete dedication to what is the truth, right? If you think about like the focus power, the hyper focus power of that, it can bring completely different ways of doing things. So I think there's very much to be embraced. Let me ask you this question as well. Suppose, like, this is coming to me intuitively now. If you think about, if we're gonna embrace, which we should do, if we're going to be embracing employment of people with disability at all levels, right? Do we almost need a toolkit of assets, which are educational assets that inform employers on what may be some of the adjustments that are necessary? So, like, again, let me do the analogy of, say, autism, right? So it might be, or ADHD. It might be, I can't work in a group office environment because all the noises are distracting to me. It's a sensory
Yep.
overload. Therefore, I need to work from home, for example,
Yep.
or I
Yep.
need to have a sensory break of X, Y, Z. Now, again, autism is interesting because it's, they call it the spectrum for a reason, because
Mm-hmm.
there's all these multiple dimensions and not everyone is the same in terms
That's
of,
right.
we're either
Not
sensory
everyone's the same
seeking.
on a given
Exactly.
day
We're either
either.
sensory seeking or sensory avoiding. Like, there's a whole
Yeah.
world, right? But
That's
here's
right.
my distinction, right? For employers that need to be, enlightened and educated about this, my question is, do we need to have a broad set of assets, which are educational toolkits, which could give insight to some of the possible adjustments within the workplace that could be
Yeah.
supportive?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a few things I'd say about that. One is absolutely we do. Um, there are two places I would suggest people go if they're looking for that information. One is to the Australian Human Rights Commission, because they have this fantastic website called Includability. I don't have the link to hand, but if you just Google includability or go to the Human Rights Commission website, you'll find it, and it's got some brilliant resources of the sort that you're talking about. Also job access, which is the place to go if you're looking for assessments, workplace assessments, or workplace adjustments, or modifications, equipment, and so forth. They also have some really great resources, which are a good starting point. But the third thing I'd say about that is that all the resources in the world, whilst they're absolutely crucial, and I think, really do help with that kind of piece I was talking about before, about making people feel more comfortable and less fearful of making a mistake, which I think is what drives a lot of people's concerns about employing people with disability in the first place, is fear. But I think the other piece about education is just actually, connecting with us, be that, through an employment process, or be it just through, connecting with us on LinkedIn, or whatever it may be. But I don't think there's any substitute for actually, um, you know, sitting down and having a conversation with us.
Right. You're
And
so right. You're so right. Gosh, please continue. I've got so many questions on this point as well. Yeah, this is really
well,
interesting.
I was just going to give you an example. I mean,
Mm,
I do think that I what I'm about to say, I sort of have to put a caveat before,
mhm.
um, which is to say, um, you shouldn't. I'm not suggesting you should rely on a person with disability to have all the answers and to take on the mental load of, telling you exactly what we need, because, it's a two-way street, and, you need to do some work too. However, what I would say is one of my most memorable employment experiences was, I worked in the Department of Housing in Queensland for a while, and I had a manager who understood disability very, very well. And she got me in and she told me that I had the job. And then she basically sat me down and just asked me a whole heap of questions, which frankly really made me think in a way that I hadn't before, about how she could and how the team could make the workplace accessible to me. And it was just so refreshing, because no one had ever, well, people had asked me before, but no one had asked me in this level of depth. And no one had really kind of delved into it with me and said to me, well, yes, that's one way of doing it, but what about if we did it this way? Would that make it even better? And my mind was blown. I was like, you kidding? Like, really? That's amazing. And honestly, it was one of the best workplaces I've ever experienced. And, she would say things to members of the team like, now you do realize that your reliance on paper is going to be a problem here. You're going to have to, and this is back in the, early 2000s when there was a lot more reliance on paper than there is now. But, she was putting them on notice. You're going to have to change the way you work, and there's no apology for that. That's just how it's going to be. And, that's the kind of manager you want. You want someone who's really going to be in your corner and who's not going to make you feel like, oh, we're making adjustments for you so that you can be here. We're not going to make you feel like a burden, but someone who's actually going to make you feel like an asset.
Absolutely.
And it's a really significant shift, I think.
Oh, I love that. That's such an inspirational story, and that goes, I would say, beyond management into leadership, right? It's a
Yeah,
true
yeah,
leader.
yeah,
And I want to add to that with one brief thing. I think that that example of a leader is someone with the knowledge, with the right values, and yeah, that's paving the way, right? So I think it's wonderful. My broader experience of, should we say, society culture is that I think a lot of people, unfortunately, are afraid of speaking to anyone with a
yeah,
disability, and
yeah,
that's purely out of, I don't know, they've got some mental blocks, right?
yeah.
And then maybe they feel not confident on how to interact. They don't know what they're going to say. They don't know what to say
Mm,
themselves. Like, there's all these things that everyone's got their story and their reason, and I can tell that with confidence because on the Central Coast where I live, I've got a large friend group, and I've set up a provision business recently. And out of that friend group, some of the people are like, "Gosh, it's amazing. I wouldn't know what to say." Like, they say it, and it's not out of exclusion. It's out of a
no,
nervousness and a
that's
fear,
right. That's
right?
right. That's right.
So I guess like my distinction here is that this is also one of the cultural dials that we need to shift. We need to get people
Mm,
out of fear and
totally.
into comfort, just to have that
Yep,
conversation. Like, hello,
totally.
you're a human. I want to talk
Yeah,
to you and treat you
yeah.
exactly the same as anyone else. What do you need? How can I? How
Yep.
can I? How can I be of service?
Yes, yes. You've just actually tapped into I, I've just been putting together a synopsis for a talk I'm going to be doing, a TED talk I'm going to be doing
Awesome.
in the future, and actually fear is actually what it's about. It's about, because I actually think even when people are displaying what looks like blatant ignorance or what looks like extreme apathy and disinterest,
Mm-hmm.
I actually think, I don't have any evidence, but I mean, I've been around for a while and I've been ignored a lot, believe you me. And I do actually believe that there is fear underlying those states of being. I think that fear underlies all of it.
Yeah.
Um, I I have, I mean, I have gone outside my house at times and, had interactions with people and literally thought to myself, can they see me or
Right.
am I invisible?
Right.
And the impact of that, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I laugh it off all the time.
Mm,
It's
mm,
but the impact of that,
mm,
if you actually stop to think about it, is
mm.
actually pretty horrendous.
It's
You
awful.
know,
Yeah.
it's not good. And this is not a poor me story. I'm just making the point
Mhm.
that this invisibility is is really, really damaging to people in ways that I don't even think that most of us are aware of.
Completely
This
agree.
kind of notion that I can walk into a shop. I remember walking into shops when my children were young, like I'm talking maybe, 7 or 8, and the shop assistant would still, even though they're children, would still talk to them over me.
Right.
And I would just have to go, excuse
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
hello,
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here. Can you?
Yeah.
Um,
Mm,
yeah, and it happens all the time.
does.
And I agree with you that it's absolutely just about people being frightened of saying the wrong thing. And this is where I worry, even though I absolutely understand the power and the force of language, this is where I worry about some of the language debates that we get into, in relation to disability, even though I think they're super important and we have the right to be referred to in an appropriate way.
Mm-hmm.
But I do worry that it doesn't help that that sense that people have that it's all just really hard, and they're already terrified, and then, oh God, what if they use the wrong word?
Right.
It just adds another layer of complexity.
Yes.
So, but having said that, I'm not here to to make it super easy. Society doesn't make it super easy for people with disability. So I do think there's that going back to that education piece, I think, people need to educate themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm.
that's on them, not on me.
It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I think what I'm getting from this is I think that over time, through whatever mechanisms possible, it'd be wonderful to get some data in terms of even
Mm,
survey data from people, like what are
mm,
your top, identifying the top 5 reasons that people feel, let's use the word, uncomfortable speaking with people with
mhm,
disability. I do
mm,
agree, without a doubt. Fear, I think, would be one of the big ones. I also have people in my life that are more, I'm an extroverted person generally,
yeah,
so I get my
yeah,
energy from interacting. And my wife gave me a compliment. She goes, like, for example, my cousin has Down syndrome in the UK, and whenever I go to
mm,
see him, we'll have our chats, and there might be a certain point in the conversation where he doesn't have anything else to say, and my wife's compliment to me will be, you could talk to anyone and just make a conversation out of it, and that's your talent because you're an
mm,
extrovert, right? She
mhm,
goes, I find that, because he's more introverted, she said, I find it difficult because at a certain point I don't know what to say anymore. Now, of
mm,
course,
mm.
there's a whole variety of disabilities, but I just want to put that little one in there, just as
Yeah,
maybe a
yeah,
microcosm of the space where it's
yep,
kind of, if people are more
yeah,
introverted or less confident socially, as
yeah,
well as the fear thing, maybe they don't
yes,
literally, they clam up, because an introvert can clam up when it comes to interacting
yeah.
with people they
And
don't
and look,
know.
that is totally understandable. And look,
Yes.
I you know, um, I'm not suggesting, I don't believe that fear is confined to non-disabled people. I reckon
Correct. Yeah.
a lot of people with disability live in a pretty constant state of anxiety
Yes.
too. Well, about whether people will talk to us, but also, but also about, about how we navigate the world, and um, whether we are going to be heard, whether we are going to get a seat at the table. Like, you know, the fear is not one way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we need to. I don't want to create kind of an us and them dichotomy
No, 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 exactly
here at
right.
all, because I actually think that that's disingenuous.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've been fearful at times of um, of interactions that I've had, because I've worried that I might get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel a great deal of pressure as a, a leader in this community to try not to get it wrong. Um, so I'm not suggesting that I'm above reproach, or that anyone's above reproach, but I think the point is that if we all could just stop for a couple of seconds and remember that we're actually all humans, and that we're not actually, we're all interconnected. We're not actually interacting with a person with disability. We're interacting with a person. You know, that would be a really, I mean, I know it sounds kind of really obvious, but I don't think it is. If it was, we'd all be doing it, wouldn't we?
Correct.
So,
Correct. And that's probably a good place to wrap it up. Like, there's so many things I'd love to ask you more. I'm just respectful of your time. I noticed that we're coming up on it now. And Emma, gosh, really everything we're talking about here, it all, I hope, will continue to shift the dial to ultimately love and acceptance, right? Because with education, with
exactly.
leadership, the ecosystem, evolving, that ultimately comes down to that love and acceptance thing, where there's we don't
Yep.
see differences, we just see opportunities to work together.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, it would be really great if we didn't even have to have acceptance. Just because what are we accepting?
Just the isness. Yeah, good point.
What are we
You're right.
accepting?
You're right. That's a good. But that's actually good. Yeah,
We
touche.
could just
Good distinction. I love that. Thank you for making that. Thank you, Emma. That sharpens even my thinking on that. I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah.
love and I think if we could just have shared contribution and equity, equality, and shared contribution, where everybody's contribution is actually valued equally, that would be nice. That would be nice.
Love it. Love it. Emma Bennison, it's been a pleasure having you on today. Thank you so much for dialing into the podcast. It really has been an honor to connect with you.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Pleasure. And just one reminder for everyone, my name is Chris Hall, Peak Provider. If you ever need any help on growing your business, that's what we do through sales and marketing projects. So go to peakprovider.com.au if you ever want to grow your NDIS provision business. Thank you, Emma. You have a wonderful day ahead, and like, subscribe, share, because this is a great conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thanks.